Law enforcement and strange paranormal intruders. Some of the most intriguing reports of brushes with the paranormal come from the various men and women of law enforcement. These are the people in charge of keeping us safe and upholding the law, of going out and apprehending those who would seek to break those laws, but it often appears that there are some culprits for which these police officers are fully unprepared to deal with. Here we will look at strange trespassers and intruders that prove to be far more than your average criminal. A creepy encounter was given by Reddit user Lee Capstone, who says that he is a police officer in Troy, Alabama. At the time of his brush with the unexplained, he was allegedly on patrol during the third shift, 10:30 p.m., 6:30 a.m., and one of the places he was charged with passing by was a local graveyard, as there had been many complaints of vandals and underage drinking in the area. The graveyard itself is described as being very large and the final resting place of quite a few soldiers from the Civil War era. As he was making his way down a narrow, one-lane road to the tree-lined entrance of the graveyard, he says he noticed a strange movement out of the corner of his eye. This is where things would get rather weird, and he says of what happened next: "I hit the brakes and out my driver's side window about 100 yards away I saw a black human appearing figure slowly walking toward the tree line. I grabbed my alley light attached to my patrol car and got the beam on the figure before it walked behind a large pecan tree. I observed it walk approximately 6 steps. There were no facial features and the figure was just a black haziness, and it actually turned slightly towards me as it kept walking. Now I also want to note this was in the spring and dew would always be on the ground during this time. I got out of my patrol car and the figure never appeared from behind the tree, even though its path it had been on it should have. So I got back in and drove down to the area I observed the figure. Once I got close to the tree, 20 yards or so, I stopped and got out. Now this area was totally grass and there was a heavy layer of dew that night on the ground. There were no footsteps anywhere. The only tracks were my own from me walking around the tree trying to get my brain to figure out what I saw. I radioed my buddy to come to the cemetery and I would explain more when he got here. I told him the story and he walking around also, and we found nothing. This was not surprising to him since we had both been on night shift for years and we had both seen weird lights, noises, both outside and in buildings, but this was my first time seeing some figure. Also, this was the longest observation I had ever had. It seems perhaps fitting that a graveyard should draw to itself an account such as this, and places of death do indeed seem to be prone to these ghostly trespassers. Another report comes from a report on Ranker, from a commenter who claims his father was a police officer and had had a very scary experience at a morgue in the state of Illinois. One evening the officer and his partner got a call from the custodian of the morgue on suspicion of someone breaking and entering. When they arrived, the custodian told them that he had been mopping a corridor when he had seen a shadowy figure dash from one side of the hallway to the other. Not knowing what to do, he had called the cops, and there they were. The police officers moved in and called out to anyone who might be there, but received no answer. They did a sweep of the area, but there seemed to be no sign of anyone there, and no trace at all of a break-in. As they made their way back to the entrance, the custodian called out to them and said that he had just seen the trespasser run down another corridor, and that she was a woman. The two officers hurried off in pursuit, with the custodian assuring them that there was no exit down that way. That was when they saw the trespasser lurking in the shadows down the hall, and the commenter explains, the woman was standing by a big grey door. Lights were off here too, so it was hard to see her clearly. But he could see she wasn't holding a gun, had long, fair hair. He stepped out from behind the corner to talk to her, but she opened the door, disappeared into the dark inside, and shut it firmly behind her. He sprinted up to the door and pulled at the handle. Locked. Banged on it for a while and called out to her, but no answer. The door had a deadlock on it, so his partner brought over the custodian to unlock it. They turned on their flashlights to see better. The custodian rounded the corner and faltered a little. This door? You sure? This door doesn't lock from the inside. The custodian found the right key and carefully turned it in the lock. Click. We're coming in. Have your hands up. They entered the room, flashlights illuminating every corner. The custodian hit the light switch, and the room lit up. It was empty except for some equipment against the wall, and 2 gurneys in the middle of the room. One was empty, and one was covered in a sheet with what appeared to be a body underneath it. Nice hiding spot. He approached, and it was the smell that first spooked him. It smelled like a corpse. He pulled the sheet down and there the woman lay, straggly light brown hair all around her face. The tag on her toe said she died 4 days ago. Phantom intruders seem to be a common type of paranormal encounter for law enforcement officers, and another report of a similar vein was given by Reddit user Sorry for Being Right, who says he is a police officer and that he had been called to a private business's building after an alarm had been tripped. As they arrived, the witness says that 2 other alarms were tripped in the same building, and it seemed very obvious that there was a trespasser on the premises. However, this would soon prove to be far from a normal intruder. He says of the strange incident, another unit and I set up a canvas on the building. Nothing strange from the outside. Doesn't appear to have any forced entry. Other units and I get permission to enter from building owner. We go in through a side door on this thrift shop. We announce ourselves, no response. We clear the entire 2 stories of a standard thrift shop size, not too big. We don't find anything. Store owner meets us outside with an iPad to show us camera footage. The 3 alarms that get tripped show a faint gust of light wind that moves clothes on racks. We just assume it was a draft because it happened to 3 consecutive clothing racks. So the owner resets the alarms, and we leave. 15 minutes later the store owner calls us and wants to meet again to show us something. Clear as freaking day, as my partner and I were leaving the side door after clearing the building, is a shadow like a figure appearing to wave at us, saying goodbye. Chills hit me. I didn't want to accept or deny it. We occasionally get tripped alarms, and anytime we don't respond to the place, more alarms get tripped until we at least show up. If we show up, we will have like a 68-week streak without any activity. We think there's something just wanting police friends. We did research, and we can't find anything regarding death or dying in the building. So who knows? As long as it's friendly, it can trip whatever alarms it wants. I still won't go in without a partner. In another case Reddit user Meko describes how his father was a police officer who came across a strange intruder at a lakeside in New Hampshire. They got a call that a little girl had wandered out to the lake by herself at night and seemed to be lost. The officers went to check it out and there was no sign of the girl, so more officers were called in to carry out a search of the area. The commenter's father was one of the first to arrive, and the incident supposedly played out as follows: as they exit their car, they slowly start to walk toward the lake. As they near the water, my father's partner hits him on the shoulder and points towards the lake, and there stands this little girl. My father said when he turned to see her standing in the water, and every hair on the back of his neck stood up once he saw her. It was 2 a.m., and in November, so it was very cold outside. He said she was in a white nightgown with no shoes standing in the water. They both look at each other knowing that something wasn't right about this situation. They report to dispatch that they found the girl. They walk a little closer, and my father kneels down and holds his arms out and calls for the girl to come to him. The little girl then turns her attention to my father and slowly starts to walk towards him from out of the water. As this is happening, another unit pulls up to witness this girl walking up to my father. Just as the little girl is within 8 feet of my father, she disappears and there was nothing left but tiny little footprints in the dirt. They all stand there in disbelief trying to figure out what just happened, and one of the police officers turns and says, "How the FCK are we going to explain this?" Some other cases seem decidedly more sinister in nature. A case personally relayed to me by a reader comes from a self-professed police officer in California, who went out to investigate some complaints about someone running amok out in the Angeles National Forest, within Los Angeles County in Southern California, with the perpetrator howling in the night. The cops went there expecting to find some pranksters messing around, but would come across something far stranger than they could have guessed. The witness told me, "We had this call of someone messing around up on a trail on the outskirts of the Angeles National Forest. We get some troublemakers up there sometimes, so we went to check it out, thinking we might find some kids screwing around. So we go up there along this trail and there is no one. In fact, the forest seems weirdly quiet. Then we walk along this trail, which is actually a pretty well-traveled trail, and come across, I shit you not, this deer head sitting right there in the middle of the trail. It is just a whole deer head, no sign of the body, that seems to have just been placed there for someone to find. We are immediately on alert because in addition to troublemakers there has been some gang activity in the area as well, so we have our firearms drawn and we scan the area. Then my partner calls out to someone I can't see yet, but when I look we can see what looks like a figure in dark clothing standing off in the trees. We both tell them to halt and come forward, but whoever it is retreats into the trees. We go crashing into the underbrush towards them, but we lose sight of him and he is suddenly gone, as if he has just vanished. We are pretty unnerved by this point and we go back to the trail, and that's when we notice that the deer head is gone, just a splotch of blood left behind. Off in the trees we hear a howl, like an animal but none I've ever heard before. We called it in and got the hell out of there. I have no idea what was going on. It is hard to know what to make of this one, and although I tried to follow up on it the witness never responded back. Who knows what is going on here? Moving along we have the strange case of a police officer who kept getting 911 calls from some creepy abandoned house out in the gloomy forest. The first call happened as the witness was with a partner on patrol at around 2 or 3 a.m., with the operator saying that the caller had simply hung up and had refused to answer a call back. They went out to do a wellness check to just see that everything was okay, and the coordinates brought them up a rural dirt road that led to a chained-off area, after which they continued on foot. After hiking along for some time through the growing murk they came to 2 decrepit-looking old houses that seemed abandoned and out in the middle of nowhere, one of them from which they were sure the 911 call had come. The witness then explains the following sequence of outlandish events. As I am shining my flashlight at one of the houses I see a figure move from inside. Instantly I'm like, oh SHT, people actually live back here. As I thought for sure the houses were going to be vacant. Shortly after a man and a woman walk outside and ask what is going on. We tell them we received a 911 hang-up call from address 123 Main, made up, and asked if they had called. The man tells us his address is 124 Main and the one across the street is 125 Main, which he says is vacant. He proceeds to tell us there is a 123 Main which is basically in the middle of these tall weeds forest-looking area just to the north of his house. He says the house is vacant and run down and can only be reached on foot. I ask him how far away it is from his house and he says probably a couple of football fields away. Now while all this walking investigating was going on we had received I think 2 more 911 hang-up calls. Same address. Same result. Before we made this trek out into the middle of the woods we called for another car and eventually another 2-man unit responded. The 4 of us now wandered out into the woods, 2 of us with our assault rifles out and followed a barely beaten path to where we assumed we would find a house. Fighting spider webs and low-hanging tree branches we eventually reach our destination. I am terrible at describing things but this house was straight out of any horror movie you want to imagine. It was run down. Had a tree that had fallen through the middle and had now become incorporated with the house throughout the years. The house was nearly falling apart and was completely overgrown by greenery. Having come this far we decide to continue on, even though we were pretty sure the house would be vacant. After fighting through some thick brush we find our entrance. We each have to climb over some fallen brick walls and other wooden shit before we actually make entry. My biggest fear at this point is this stupid rotten house collapsing on itself and being trapped inside with no one being able to find us. We searched the entire house and like we thought no one inside. And when I say we searched the entire house I mean the entire house. Nothing was left unchecked. Feeling satisfied we all climb our way back out of the bullshittery and start heading back towards where the 2 original houses were. As we walk back dispatch radios us and tells us they received another 911 hang-up call coming from the same address. This time dispatch tells us they were able to make call back, and when the person answered they could hear what sounded like a child playing on the phone. The four of us looked at each other and decided we were done with this call. We had done everything we could up to that point and were not about to get called back into possibly a demon's house because a child was on the phone. We clear the call and don't receive any more 911 hang-up calls for the rest of the night. Interestingly enough, the witness says they got yet another call from the address 6 months later, and once again no one was there. Eerie indeed. Lastly, we come to a report from Ranker, from a commenter who tells a story told to him by his uncle, a sheriff of a small town in New Mexico. According to him, there was once a local news reporter known only as Bob D, who showed up at any major police activity after using a police scanner to find the best scoops. The reporter was apparently a bit of a prankster too, always going around flicking people's ears, and he was apparently mostly well liked, but unfortunately passed away from lung cancer. It doesn't seem to have been the end of his snooping around though, as the commenter explains. For the next couple of weeks, after his funeral, people kept talking about seeing Bob at car wrecks, fires, all the same stuff he used to report on. There were 20-30 reports like this from civilians and members of the force. My uncle didn't buy it. Until the night he and my aunt showed up at our house, gun drawn, pale as paper. We asked him what the hell happened, and he had to sit down, take his breath, compose himself and start to outline what happened. No, this is a guy that I never saw get rattled by anything. He said, my aunt, and he was sitting on the couch in their house watching TV. My uncle kept scratching at his ear, over and over. Finally, my aunt asked him what the problem was, and he turned around just in time to see their bedroom door open. Bob D is standing there in the doorway. Clear as day. My uncle jumped up, cussed or something, got my aunt's attention, who turned to see him there too. As soon as they both made eye contact with him, Bob smiled, turned, walked across the living room and out their front door. Closed the door behind himself and was gone. My uncle got control of himself and ran outside. Gun drew looking for Bob, but he was gone. At that point, they ran over to our place. We went over there and didn't see anything, but my aunt and uncle stayed at our place that night. At work the next day, all the guys on the force were giving my uncle lots of "we told you so." People around town said they saw Bob D show up at police scenes for at least another 2/3 months. My dad saw him in our darkroom in our basement with a friend. He was flicking their ears in the dark. During the 3rd month, people that saw him kept saying he was looking worse and worse. My uncle saw him 2 more times, each time confirming he was looking more and more worn. My dad had concluded that he was decomposing and his ghost was reflecting that process. Every time my ear itches, I get goosebumps. These have certainly all been instances in which even the bravest or most unflappable of us might be inclined to feel quite a bit of fear and panic in the face of such forces. One would think that police officers would be somehow more prepared to deal with these things, but none of this is in their training, and in the end when faced with the paranormal they are just like everyone else. There are no arrests to be made here, no handcuffs for what they have encountered, and no procedure for dealing with such occurrences. In the end they end up just more bizarre tales to add to the rest, although perhaps gaining a bit of credibility considering their witnesses. In the end, it seems as if these officers of the law have a bit more to worry about when out on the beat than just regular criminals, and that sometimes intruders of a different sort come prowling in from the periphery of our understanding.